Okay, we'll go ahead and get started since it's now 12 p.m. on the East Coast. Thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of the spring semester. This semester, we are continuing our 90% webinar series. Today, we are privileged and excited to have Ms. Jane Cage speaking with us about the long-term recovery and resilience of Joplin, Missouri. For over 30 years, Jane worked in the IT channel as an entrepreneur as the partner and COO of Heartland Technology Solutions, a regional business networking firm with offices in 5 states. She became recognized as one of the most influential and powerful women in the IT channel. Known for her channel advocacy, leadership, and gentle approach to building a successful business, Jane served on a number of industry and vendor boards until the sale of HTS in 2012. Jane, a longtime Joplin, Missouri resident, served as the volunteer chairman of the Citizens Advisory Recovery Team, CART, formed after the May 2011 tornado. As CART leader, she led the group in listening to citizens about their vision for a recovered Joplin. The resulting report became the long-term recovery plan for Joplin, Missouri. Jane has been a civic leader in Joplin for many years, leading organizations such as Rotary, the YMCA, the Humane Society, and the Chamber of Commerce. Today, Jane acts as a community liaison for many groups and continues to participate in recovery activities. Jane has consulted on projects around long-term recovery, resilience, and as a facilitator as the principal of Insight 522. She has received many recognitions and awards for her leadership during the long-term recovery of Joplin, some of which include the 2012 Rick Rescorla National Award for Resilience from the United States Department of Homeland Security. She's been recognized as the 2012 Joplin Citizen of the Year. She was recognized as the Distinguished Alumna of Wake Forest University in 2012, and she was recognized as 50 Missourians You Should Know in 2013. Additionally, she was awarded the 2013 J. Kevin Lavin National Leadership Award from the National Weather Association, and she was the 2016 winner of the Harvard National Preparedness Leadership Initiative Meta Leader of the Year. And now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Miss Jane Cage.
Well, you certainly made me sound much better than I actually am. So hello, everybody who's on the call. Pleasure to be with you today. And I'm going to spend maybe 30 minutes or so talking about my perspective on Joplin's long-term recovery, and then I hope some of you will have questions. I'm certainly not an emergency manager from what you heard. I wasn't keyed in on the response phase of what happened in Joplin as much as I was the long-term recovery phase. And I'm assuming that everyone can hear me well enough. Christopher, do you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great, Jane.
Okay. With that in mind, then let's move forward then. A little bit for those of you who, I'm guessing in some ways, if you're still college students, when Joplin happened, you were probably somewhere in junior high perhaps, or maybe in the early days of high school. So let me talk to you a little bit about Joplin. We're about 50,000 residents during the day, or during the evening, and about 200,000 in the day because we are a center for commerce and workers all around our area. I lived in Joplin since 1978, and in all the time I lived here, there have been many tornado warnings around us, but never a tornado that had come through Joplin. That afternoon, May 22nd, 2011, I was at home. We heard that there was the possibility that we would have bad weather. The potential was there, but I really wasn't paying much attention because we'd had so many warnings in the past and nothing had ever happened. That afternoon when the sirens went off for the first time, I turned on the TV, and then when they went off the second time, I really took it seriously because I thought it was perhaps headed for my house. So I went down to the basement. When I came up, it looked like nothing had happened at my house. Well, that turned out certainly for the rest of Joplin not to be the case. If you look at this map, here's Joplin north to south, and the area that we in Joplin we refer to it as looking like a fish. You can see from the look of it, the tornado took a 13-mile path across the lower one-third of Joplin and at times up to 3/4 of a mile wide, and it turned out to be the seventh worst tornado in U.S. history and the worst in the U.S. since 1948. To talk about the intensity of it, we had winds that turned out to be well over 200 miles an hour. It was a multi-vortex tornado when it was west of town, and by the time it hit the city limits, had grown to an EF5 with incredible winds and intensity. You can see from this picture that at times it was moving as slowly as 10 miles an hour, so it caused a lot of churn across the city and really, I think, intensified the destruction of the time that we had it here. To talk about the impacts of what happened, this is a car. I took most of these pictures maybe 2 weeks after the tornado, but we lost 18,000 cars that day. We had 7,500 structures that were damaged, 4,000 of those destroyed. So it affected about 1/3 of Joplin residents in some way or another. Just in one location alone, St. John's, now Mercy Hospital, there were 1,200 jobs that were lost in those 20 minutes. Overall, about 530 businesses damaged or destroyed. In terms of property, for the city, we lost 2 fire stations, 5 of our city parks were damaged. And for the schools, we lost our high school and our technical school, our middle school, and 3 of our elementary schools, as well as the school administration building. So those 20 minutes had a really huge impact on us. And what it left behind, 3 million cubic yards of debris, which was more than the World Trade Center. And I think this picture is a great representation of just how destroyed Joplin was. Through really what I would call the grace and kindness of President Obama, who granted us expedited debris removal, which meant we were going to get greater assistance from the federal government than is usual. So we had help from the Army Corps of Engineers. We had about 130,000 volunteers who came to help us in that first year with this incredible task of removing debris. And by August the 7th of that year, we had pretty much swept clean the most impacted areas around the city. In terms of injuries and deaths, as you heard from Christopher, one of my early jobs was president of the Humane Society here. So I'm pretty tuned into animals. So we lost on that first night and through the week, the Humane Society collected 1,300 animals that had been displaced. In terms of statistics, in the first couple of weeks after the tornado, they handed out 17,000 tetanus vaccinations because there was hardly anyone who was working on debris removal who didn't have the opportunity to step on a nail or a sharp piece of metal. This is Mercy Hospital or St. John's in the background of this shot. The front side is the dialysis center, so you can see what the devastation was really like. But Freeman Hospital, about less than half a mile away from here, was the place where everyone had to go, because we had to evacuate Mercy that night and then find places for everyone who had been there, as well as the number of people who were injured. So 1,700 people got treated at Freeman that night with 22 life-saving surgeries. They did over 800 x-rays in that one night. But I think the most important statistic to remember this, and what sets us apart and saddens us all to this day, is that we lost 161 of our friends and families and friends and family members and neighbors over the course of the tornado. Some died that night, some died later on from their injuries. So that's really what makes this in some ways so devastating, is the huge loss of life. Now, what was I doing in these early days? Well, I did pretty much what everybody else did in Joplin. The lower right-hand side, the picture of my house, this is the way it looked before the tornado. It's how it looked after the tornado. In the upper corner, with so many people who lost their houses, lots of us took someone to live. This is a couple from my church that moved in with me. In the middle, this was the tornado dog that I adopted, Lulu. In the upper left-hand corner, I think this is Memorial Day weekend when we're at a friend's house picking up debris. So I did all of the things that really almost everyone else in Joplin did. There's not anything unique about what happened with me here. All of us were working as hard as we could in terms of recovery, but I'll admit I felt this need to do more, and I was looking for a vehicle when I got asked to go to a meeting. So this is kind of really the very beginning of long-term recovery in Joplin. If you can imagine, the city government was already taxed to the very limit with recovery tasks, with trying to get streets cleared, with utilities returned, with trying to get fire stations up to snuff, with all of the work involved in the short-term recovery. And so FEMA had come here and sent someone from their long-term recovery division, whose name was Steve Castner. And he had done long-term recovery after other disasters and suggested to the Joplin leadership that citizens would have a more vested stake in recovery if they could participate. The truth of the matter is that the city government was really too busy to take that task on, so they suggested that they ask for volunteers who might be willing from among community members to take that task on. Already, key leaders had been meeting informally to talk about recovery, and the city manager and the chamber president brainstormed a list of names that might be willing to step up, and I was one of those. That's me in the middle in the white sweater. The other people, a banker, someone who ran a small business of her own, someone who worked in Joplin housing, another banker, goodness. Someone who was in charge of the Joplin real estate organization. And they brought us together for a meeting. And FEMA, because they had already worked on this, had already mapped out kind of a basic plan about what could happen related to recovery. So they suggested that we think about recovery in terms of sectors or topics across the community. So that night we had a meeting and we came up with 5 sectors that we thought deserved special attention: economic development, housing and neighborhoods, schools and community facilities, infrastructure and environment, and they suggested this 5th sector, sustainability. But what we ended up doing was deciding that sustainability worked across all those in terms of long-term recovery. So we ended up with 4 sectors, and I agreed to help chair schools and community facilities. They suggested that we have a public input meeting to start to get the community to participate. And when they suggested the day, it was just 12 days after our formation. And I was astounded that that even could happen. But they've been working in the background. And so on July 12th, we had our first public input meeting. And we invited members from all over the community. We held it, you can tell by the look of the gymnasium, we held it at what had been the former high school in Joplin and was being used as one of our tool middle schools. We had 2 sessions so people could come in the afternoon or in the evening. And if, from the look of it, you can see we set up boards all around the room that had to do with these sectors. We asked community members to give us their opinions about what were opportunities, what we might be missing in Joplin, where they saw recovery going. And we got, that night, 1,500 ideas on sticky notes around the room. This is just an example of one board. I'll tell you that when I looked around the room that night, I was really moved because I saw people that I recognized. I saw a nurse I knew from the hospital who had lost her home. I saw a man who had been the caretaker in a household with 3 developmentally disabled men who had died that night. I saw someone who had lost a son, but they were all there. And they were there because they were looking for this. They were looking for hope. What that meeting did for us that first day, July 12th, in the midst of debris removal, was it gave us an opportunity to stop looking around at the devastation that surrounded us and to start to look ahead. It was a reminder that our lives wouldn't always be the way that they were at that point, which was chaotic and disrupted. So as a group, we took those ideas, and in the meantime, these things were happening. On August the 17th, school opened on time, which was a miracle that could happen. 87 days after the tornado, we had turned a big box store at the mall into a high school for the 11th and 12th graders. We found a home for the 9th and 10th graders at a high school that was built in 1900. And our middle schoolers went to school at an industrial building that was in an industrial park on the south side of town. So it was a miracle that we made that happen. And in the meantime, my group had been working. We had taken these 1,500 ideas and started to categorize them and decide what might be important for Joplin. So we pulled these down, we started to narrow them down, and we had the second public input meeting with the goal of trying to confirm what we had known. So we asked people to vote. This was my sector, for example, schools and community facilities. We asked them to look at all these ideas and tell us what was most important. And you can see by looking that they were interested in community gathering places, a place that we could share with schools or other facilities to be able to give ourselves more opportunities than we had had before. And this is a good sign if you think about it, because we were trying to think already about what we could be and not what we were. What it gave us, I think, was it gave us a sense of empowerment. It gave us the opportunity to think that we could take ownership of the future of Joplin, and that the citizens who were working on this believed that they could make a difference. So it was the next step in us trying to build our own road to recovery. Now in September, we'd still continued to meet, and we took, you can see, this is at my church, by the way. When I look around the table, I see the Director of Economic Development for the state of Missouri, I see our city planner, I see someone from the American Institute of Architects who is helping us facilitate these meetings. And we took the ideas that we were gathering and we started to kind of almost look back at the pre-tornado world in Joplin to remember what had been our priorities and put those beside what our post-tornado opportunities might be. We had a post-tornado new normal is what I would call it. And if these were going to be what we wanted, what resources did we already have to work on these ideas? What were our opportunities? We did a SWOT essentially on ourselves. This was a pretty tough meeting because it forced us to look deep and to look wide at what the community was already doing and figure out how we could fit into that. But what it did do was it gave us focus, which was an important step in moving forward. Now remember the tornado May 22nd, and so we've been maybe 3 or 4 months in at this point. And we're all working, I would say all of us felt we probably had gained what we would call the tornado 20 because we were meeting so often at lunchtime and at dinners, trying to find time, among everything else that was going on to focus on this task. So in October of that year, FEMA gave us what I would call a really great gift. A design charrette, which for those of you who might be in emergency management or planning was a word I didn't even know before the tornado. But what happened on 2 days is that 60 architects, landscape designers, and city planners from across the region and across the country came to Joplin. They read what we had begun to develop as themes, and then they started to give us a visual interpretation of what that might look like after they had driven through the city for the day. We had a 2-day meeting. At the end of the first night, they called citizens in. We looked at what they had been drawing. We gave them feedback. it started to change their focus, and it started to help us get a clearer picture of what we wanted. They redrew on the second day, and then at the end of the second night, they presented those ideas to us. What those turned out to be was really a breath of fresh air for us, because before it had all been words, and here we started to get pictures. We started to get ways that we could explain to citizens what some of the words you see on these pictures mean. I have a whole new vocabulary now after the tornado that I never had before. I know planning words like loft over retail and curb cuts and bioswale, which is what this picture at the bottom represents, a way to gather water and not let it go into the runoff system so that we could get it back into the ground. But those were hard words and hard phrases to describe to citizens who knew that they wanted something different but didn't know how to describe it. So what that did was it gave us what I would consider to be clarity. It gave me a way to explain ideas and to draw. I will tell you that from my experience with architectural drawings here and from what I know from my other visits around the country, for example, to Tuscaloosa, Walt Maddox, their mayor there, gave me a really great piece of advice, and that is never make these architectural drawings so clear that someone can figure out where they live. Because when we put these drawings up at one of the workshops after that, I could see everyone looking, trying to figure out if a new shopping mall was going to go over where their house was. Or is the baseball field where my elementary school is? There was a lot of question about that. So the pictures were good. So I wanted clarity, but maybe not too much. Now, by then, FEMA people are going home because they can't stay here forever. And they worked with me long distance, so I had a lot of couch time as I took all the input that we had gotten from the community, what we had narrowed down into themes and kind of a vision for recovery, the pictures from the design charrette, and I put a report together, and we called that report Listening to Joplin. And on November 8th, we presented that to the city council. It was a big emotional night in Joplin. The room was full of people who had worked on these ideas, who cared about what went on and were ready to have a next step. The city council accepted the proposal. And from that, we got kind of an initial buy-in. We got a way to say, yes, we like this vision, but what would happen after that, after we presented this plan that we had all worked so hard on? Well, I would say that, a plan without follow-up is just a picture book, which is what Listening to Joplin could have become. But our mayor decided that it was important to form an implementation task force, which I ended up chairing. And with one of the planning and post-recovery words I know now, stakeholders, we brought all the stakeholders to the table. We brought the city council, the school board, the Chamber of Commerce, CART members, and we looked at this vision and the themes, and we decided to develop what we thought could be projects that could be catalysts and accelerators of recovery. And we assigned accountabilities to groups. So some of the things the CART took on, we felt that people, for example, in Joplin didn't have adequate renters and homeowners insurance. So we ran a campaign with the Department of Insurance in Missouri where we encouraged people to increase their renters insurance amount. Some responsibilities fell directly to the schools, some fell to the city, some fell to the chamber. And after I went around and talked to every group that was involved, I went to the school board and talked to school board members. When we were at the end of our development phase, I went and talked to city council members. I went to the village of Duquesne. I went to the chamber board and explained what went on. I went back to the CART board and we explained it. And on January 22nd, which is almost 7 months after the tornado, We presented our implementation task force plans to a joint meeting of the Chamber of Commerce, the school board, the Village of Duquesne, and the City Council. And in that one joint presentation, each of those groups individually ratified or adopted this implementation task force plan. So, what did that do for us as a city? One, it signified to the world that we were partners. And it demonstrated that there was partnership among all the entities of the community. And second, it gave us a plan for action. So what did all this as a process to do for us? Why did it work? Because we've gotten a lot of recognition for our work, and a lot of people have held it up as a model. And this is, in my opinion, why I think it worked. Number one is we had a huge set of back-end support from FEMA that helped us out by pushing us along, by mapping out strategies, by providing all the operational support, because we didn't have any paid staff and any paid support other than what we got from FEMA. Second, we were independent. We were independent from the city. We weren't a group that had any kind of motivation other than what was best for Joplin. For me as chairman, I didn't work for any of those groups. I was a volunteer. I didn't answer to anyone, so there wasn't any motivation for me to lead us in any particular direction other than what we heard from citizens. I think we were inclusive. Anytime anyone wanted to work with us, we brought them in. And I think we encouraged partnerships among groups, among the schools, among the chamber, among the city council, among the Village of Duquesne, and also with federal and state and local agencies, because we brought them in wherever we could to provide input and to let them hear what we were thinking. So what have I learned from all of my time in being involved in Joplin? This is probably number one, and that is recovery is planning and doing. I took a class not too long ago at the FEMA Emergency Management Institute called The Role of Local Communities After a Disaster. And it really focused on pre-disaster recovery planning. What was important on how to plan for a disaster. Well, I can tell you that you can plan all you want, but when it actually happens, planning and doing are sometimes two different things. As Steve says, it's convoluted and circular, it's frustrating, it's complex. In our situation, very difficult to concentrate on one area without neglecting something else. I'll talk in a minute about the pressure, but it's a very tough time to make that happen. This is a slide that's a great example of planning and doing. We had a vision of what we wanted Joplin to look like, but at the same time we were working on that vision, everyone was also busy wanting to recover. The building on the left, Dude's Daylight Donuts, it's an institution in Joplin. They were one of the first businesses along the Main Street's corridor to rebuild. And what did they rebuild? They rebuilt a metal building with a tiny stone front and not really great curb appeal. The building to the right, Cupcakes by Liz, built after our zoning plan was completed, and you can see it has the look we want. Parking on the side, a great curb appeal next to the curb. It looked so much better. But I can tell you that at that same time when we were working in the cycle of recovery, there are a lot of things that play into that. The city manager would say to me, or city mayor would say to me, you need to get this plan completed because everything will be rebuilt the old way, like the Dude's Daylight that you saw. Someone else would say to me, you need to get the plan completed because everyone is waiting to rebuild until they see what it calls for. So there's a lot of push and pull in those early days. But there's also, in these early days, an incredible unity that we all saw, and an incredible drive to make progress and show progress. Even among the city, we decided in the very beginning that there would be a ban on rebuilding that would be citywide while we were trying to get debris removed. That met with a lot of opposition, and the city changed their plan almost immediately to a neighborhood by neighborhood ban and release so that we could let one neighborhood begin to rebuild as quickly as the debris was gone, but before the total debris was out of the way. This is a picture at the time of the tornado of, on the left, our city manager, our mayor, our fire chief, and our police chief. At the bottom is what it looked like at the end of the first year. At the end of the first year, we had what we called a March of Unity, where probably 5,000 people walked across Joplin in the opposite path the tornado had taken to show that we weren't going to let what had happened to us overcome us. This was an incredible and an emotional day in Joplin. I can't tell you what it felt like to be in this crowd that was on essentially maybe a 6-mile walk across the city, and it ended up in the park. We had a 1-year dedication, kind of a ceremony. It's funny, a hot air balloon floated across the park that day. I'm not sure where it came from, if it was part of it, but it almost felt like as if it was the release, to me at least, of the sadness and despair that we had all felt in that first year, and the ability to kind of take a breath. You know, every day almost for a year, there was the headline in our local newspaper had to do with recovery, had to do with the tornado. So it gave us a chance to kind of take a breath and changed the atmosphere in Joplin. But at the same time, when you look at the people that are on the left, not a single one of them today have the same role or even are in town. Because the longer you move away from the disaster, the more difficult it becomes to maintain this spirit of unity. You know, if someone had asked me in the very beginning how long it would take us to recover, I would have said a year. But it takes a really long time for recovery. There are a lot of strings attached to it and to the money that we get. Political issues that were brewing before the tornado come back to life. Our city council ended up firing our city manager. He was a great recovery leader, but difficulties he had had before the tornado came into play, and one night they let him go. Our police chief retired, our fire chief took a job in another city, and our mayor resigned probably 3 years after that. So there's a big cycle. I mean, I think there's sometimes unrealistic expectations about what will happen. People who are in the community who are aware but not involved don't understand where all the money that came in went. You know, they wonder what happened, where is their share of the money. I think some people thought that the money we got would just be divided among the people who lived in Joplin. So there are a lot of misconceptions that you have to work your way through. I would also say that they don't call long-term recovery long-term for nothing. You know, in May, we'll be 6 years out. FEMA reminded me in the beginning that Joplin wasn't built in a year and that it wouldn't be rebuilt in a year. So think about those. You know, our high school opened in the fall of 2014, and the hospital didn't reopen until the spring of 2015. And a library that's being built in the recovery zone that was part of our planning even right after the tornado will be open in May 22nd of this year. So it takes much longer than anyone has ever expected, and that kind of plays on your psyche. In June of 2016, we had a new park open at the site of what had been the former Mercy Hospital. And this next slide is a great representation of, I think, how things still happen in Joplin. The upper picture was an architectural rendering of the park that we used in publicity pictures. And you can see there's a little boy looking out at the lake. We posted this on a Facebook page, and on the left, look what someone wrote. I love this place already. It's right down the street, and the pond reminds me of Parr Hill, which was another park in Joplin, and how much my son, who passed in the tornado, loved fishing in it. Love that the little boy has the same color shirt as my little fisherman. So this is 5 years after the tornado, and this mother's grief is still on the surface. We had a 5-year commemoration of the tornado, and we have now a memorial marathon that runs in Joplin. And they have a walk the night before called the Walk of Remembrance. And for the 161 people who died, they have tall banners that line the roadway, and they invite all the citizens in Joplin to come and walk that in remembrance. At the 5-year anniversary, still over 1,000 people came and walked that night. And as we would walk past those banners, I can tell you that there were people standing next to the banner of someone they loved and still in tears over what happened. So emotional recovery also takes a really long time. So before I take questions from you, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you for a minute about where we are today, because I'm proud of where we are today. This is what Mercy Hospital or St. John's looked like immediately after the tornado. This is what the new Mercy Hospital looks like, built in a new location with more distance between our two hospitals, built in a much more tornado-proof way than our previous hospital. Mercy's probably invested $1 billion in Joplin between the $500 million that this new hospital cost, the temporary facilities, the fact that they kept everyone on payroll from the day of the tornado until this hospital opened, and found places for them to work and be productive within the Mercy system and sometimes outside of it. This is a state-of-the-art hospital with glass in these upper areas that are meant to withstand winds of over 200 miles an hour. The physical mechanical plant is built further away. It's bermed underground so that we could have power there, because that was one of the problems that night, is that the generators were blown away, just seconds after the hospital was hit. So this is a great success story for us. After this is our new high school. This is what it looked like after the tornado. And beneath this is what it looks like today. We were able to pass a $62 million bond issue to help rebuild schools that had been damaged and destroyed in the tornado, and we couldn't be any prouder of the way this looks. It looks like a community college. It has a beautiful auditorium. It has carpeted hallways. I mean, it's stunning in just about every way, and it sits right in the middle of where the devastation zone has been. But I will tell you, we are a sea of utility poles. We're very lacking in trees even today. And it's one of the things that, people, frankly, I'm 60, that people my age do in faith, and that is we're planting trees that we'll never see reach their maturity. But we've had a lot of trees planted all across the city, but still the telephone poles rise above them in this area. And this is Cunningham Park, which is almost for us sacred ground, up above what it looked like from a Google map before the tornado, what it looked like about a year after. You can see that there are trees that have been planted here. There are 161 trees in this park that represent each of the citizens that died, along with this beautiful bridge and a pond in the middle of it. So we're still working hard, really, every day to recover. One resource I want to talk to you about before I take questions. About 18 months after the tornado, I realized that we had a lot of institutional knowledge about recovery that I thought we needed to be able to pass along to other people. So I used my social capital and got 47 members of the community who have been involved in every sector of recovery: healthcare, education, mental health, infrastructure, city government, to write what they had learned in these first 18 months of recovery and what they would tell someone in their same position in another community. There are 3 ways you can find this. One, you can come to the Joplin City website, joplinmo.org, and if you type in Joplin Pays It Forward, you can download a PDF of this for nothing. If you're an e-reader, one of my new post-tornado tasks is I learned how to publish an ebook. And you can buy it on Amazon for 99 cents as an ebook. And just in the last few weeks, I decided that there's still people who ask about this and want a printed copy. So I worked with Amazon, and you can buy a printed copy of this book now for, I think, $7, which is about what it costs to get it done. So we're not making any money off this, but it is a way to be able to have a printed copy of what goes on. Lastly, here are ways that you can find me. If you have questions, if I can make a connection for any of you, if you're looking for information in one area or another, I'm glad to do it. So if you'll take these down, I'm happy to do whatever I can. So with that, Christopher, I'll turn it back over to you. If there are any questions, we can take them. Here's one question that popped up. Do you have any advice or anything you would have done differently looking back in your time at CART? You know, Judy, one of the things I say often is if I had known so many people were going to pay attention to the work we had done, I would have tried to do even a better job. But if I had to think about anything different, you know, I would say all of us did the best we could with the knowledge that we had at the time. You know, there's been a time in Joplin where we reached, at one phase in our recovery, what I would call a lot of armchair quarterbacking, people who weren't involved, but with perfect hindsight think that they might have done things in a different way. And, you know, my answer to them has been, you know, where were you at the time we were working on things when you could have been involved? And secondly, that we all did our best. The advice I have for people who want to do it is really to be inclusive in every way that you can, and to be as transparent as you can be about everything that you do. Because it makes a difference to citizens that they can see through that it wasn't something that came from the top down. I think the power of our plan is that it came from the bottom up.
I have a question, and just for everybody listening, if you don't have access to a microphone, you can just type it in the chat box, and Jane will read it off and answer your question. But my question ties right into the previous question. You know, I imagine there was a lot of emotions during the initial ideas phase. So what were some of the challenges there with those emotions and ideas and kind of visions, and how are they resolved?
It's a great question, and I think people fell into two camps. There was a strong desire in Joplin to return to normal. And for some people, what normal meant was that everything would be built in the same way it was, in the same place, that you would get your neighborhood back with the same neighbor who lived to the left and the right of you, that the dry cleaners would be where the dry cleaners was. All those things would be the same. Then there was a second group, and this is probably the camp that I fell into, that thought, you know, think about it. If you're in a city, you know, it grows organically over time. Things aren't in ideal places. They don't have the kind of look that you might want. And I felt that this was the one opportunity that we had to be better than what we were before. That we had a chance to do things in a more organized fashion, to think about what we would like to be rather than just the kind of organic growth we had. And so, you know, we slowed ourselves down to take some time to plan. And that was tough for some people because all they wanted was things the way they were. And then this other camp. So I think that, you know, in some ways, we have a lot of amenities, and we're getting more amenities every day that make us a better place to live, you know, that will attract the kind of growth that we want in Joplin. But it's not been without its emotion. Here's a question. Whoops, let me pull that one back up. It appeared and then it disappeared. Let me bring it up. Which it says, what advice can you provide regarding how to deal and cope with individuals that may not always agree with you when you are trying to complete tasks or projects in the benefit of others, including those that disagree with you. You know, Bill, I think my leadership style, if you ask around Joplin, I'm probably known as a consensus builder, in that I want to get ideas from everywhere before we make a decision about how to move forward, and which is really how I tried to lead the cart, to try to make sure that we listen to every perspective. You know, we worked hard in those days. We went out to the what we would call the FEMA trailer park, the temporary housing units, and got input there. We went to the college and got input from young people so that we could try to hear every voice. But there were certainly some people that we didn't please with what we did. And I think you just have to realize that it's not possible that everyone is happy sometimes with the result. You know, the school had to buy up properties because they were on a floodplain and they couldn't really rebuild in the same position, so they had to buy houses. And so that made people who live there, you know, maybe not as happy, thinking that they weren't going to get to move back to that, you know, to the same spot. But I think we got through it all. Anything else I can answer for anyone?
Were there any other questions for Jane? Jane, I'm not seeing any others. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, it was an excellent presentation and definitely learned some more. Oh, here's one question from John.
The economic impact, you know, we had 500, and the chamber would estimate we had 530 businesses destroyed by the tornado. Out of those 530, 450 came back, which is obviously not everyone. Now, you know, some of those I know the individual situation. For example, some doctors, you know, some medical practices, because we lost, because of the, you know, the hospital and the proximity of doctors' offices to the hospital, we lost a lot of medical offices. Some of those people who were probably close to retirement age, I think, decided they didn't have the emotional stamina to rebuild, so they went ahead and retired. Some small businesses that were probably in kind of unsure footing anyway didn't come back. But overall, if you look at the numbers from where we are, at the 450 that came back, we also have 150 new businesses that have been established in Joplin in that time frame. So, and one of the biggest, and I think the greatest examples, you know, you already heard that I'm a pet lover. Blue Buffalo, for any of you who ever see their commercials on TV, a pet food manufacturer, they had always gone to some other pet food company and would have their line produced somewhere else and then distributed out. So they decided they wanted to build a manufacturing facility, and they chose to build their manufacturing facility here in Joplin because they admired our attitude and resilience after the tornado. So they built their first manufacturing plant in the country here in Joplin and are expanding it now. So that was a really great economic boom for us. And something we had been working on before the tornado and picked it back up after we got past these first couple of years is that we wanted a medical school here in Joplin, because we're kind of a medical center, but it's very difficult to keep physicians in rural communities. So a group of people got together who decided that that was really important to them and talked to the University of Kansas City, UKC, where there's a medical school there already, got them to agree that they would build a medical school in Joplin if we could help raise an initial investment. And though that group got together and raised $20 million, that brought the medical school here, and their first class will be here in the fall of 2017. So that's going to be a huge economic game changer for us. So I hope that answers, and if anything else, I can point you toward the chamber or get you in contact with someone else. So last call for questions. Yeah, it is good. John says that it's good to hear that it provided opportunity, and it has provided opportunities in lots of ways. And really rebuilding the hospital, building the library, that gave a lot of people who were out of a job after the tornado a way to come in. And the state helped with some of jobs, even around debris removal in some of those early days, getting rid of concrete stoops that gave people employment. As you can tell, I know a little about a lot, but not a lot about anything.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll go ahead and conclude it there. So just thank you so much, Jane, for your time and
You're welcome.
everything. It was very excellent and always a pleasure to hear you speak.
Well, thank you.